Hey y'all, got a little sick of doing all my lectures from the man cave. I've been spending a lot of nights in there anyway, watching movies when everybody goes to bed. So I figured I'd come on out to the living room for this. And we're going to talk about Gazebo right now. Gazebo is a story that if Why Don't You Dance introduces us to the themes that we see of life in the aftermath, and what we talk about when we talk about love. Gazebo maybe is a story that captures that aftermath the best. Now, in this case, you still have a couple who's together, but it's clear to both of us, and perhaps one of them, that the time for reconciliation is past. So we are seeing, you know, we've sort of seen things like this before without the characters maybe realizing it and without us realizing it. For instance, the Wheelers' final fight, maybe in Revolutionary Road, I think they were beyond things being able to be reconciled. Yet we didn't really know it. And it didn't feel like things really, were at the brink until April died. In this case, there's something just very, very powerful about this struggle to make things right when it's impossible. There's no way for that to happen. And let's say, take a story like A Temporary Matter, where I think too that relationship in some ways is beyond reconciliation, but there's something to be learned there, and they do learn something about the grief. And with Gazebo, I don't know, man. These stories, even when alcohol isn't the main focus, there's a real deep connection to Carver's struggle with alcoholism, especially in these middle stories, just because it's that person struggling with that thing that you can't beat, but perhaps is trying to convince himself he can, which is the struggle of an alcoholic, or struggle of many addictions. As I have a drink, no, I'm just kidding. I have a LaCroix or whatever. I've always said that these Carver stories make me want to drink while sipping some scotch, and I guess there's no better time for that than the pandemic, but I won't be doing that right now. Anyway, Gazebo is the ultimate story of dreams versus reality, and in this case, dreams that are just, abandoned. And that opening paragraph, those two lines, capture that so perfectly. That morning, she pours teachers over my belly and licks it off. That's an alcohol she's pouring on his stomach in sort of a sensual, sexy, intimate moment. That's one half of that paragraph. But the other half of the paragraph, that afternoon, she tries to jump out the window. So we see morning versus afternoon, sexy, sensual connection versus a suicide attempt. We find out that it's just the second floor, but still. So it's just that great contrast between the dreams and the reality, and he sets it up immediately in that first line. I go, Holly, this can't continue. This has got to stop. And then we get the setting of, Temporary Matter does the same thing. It places two characters in a confined location as a way to develop their character and explore their characters more. Here, the characters have confined themselves, and this is the diet or the next door apartment or the car being sold that we've seen in the other stories. This sort of quick fix that's going to fix the problems. And we already know that these are stories set in the aftermath, so it's not really going to work. Nevertheless, they're in one of the upstairs suites. Now, I sent you some pictures a little bit earlier. There's a picture of an apartment complex that was actually the inspiration for this motel that Holly and the narrator are living in and managing at the time. Hold on one second. I need to open a Powerade for my daughter. There you go, baby. You're welcome. So, there were a number of vacancies to choose from, but we needed a suite, a place to move around in and talk, so we locked up the motel office that morning and gone upstairs. So they're managing this motel, not very well, we find that out later. And they can go to any room, but they decide to go ahead and go to a suite because that's going to make things better, so they can talk. Dwayne, this is killing me. We were drinking teachers with ice and water. We'd slept a while between morning and afternoon, so we know it's the afternoon now, right after she's tried to jump off the balcony. I am, buddy. Then she was out of bed and threatening to climb out the window in her undergarments. I had to get her in a hole. We were only 2 floors up, but even so. So probably not going to kill her, but nonetheless. I've had it, she goes. I can't take it anymore. She puts her hand to her cheeks and closes her eyes. Again, the Carver image, that sort of Carver motif of physical touching, wishing we were somewhere else. She turns her head back and forth. I could die seeing her like this. Take what? I go, though of course I know. Now in this case, we see often Carver characters struggling to articulate. In this case, he knows exactly what she's talking about. She's talking about, in a general sense, their dire situation in terms of money, expenses, the fact that they're going to lose their jobs managing this motel, but also more specifically, he's cheated on her. And that being said, even though he knows the answer, he makes it like a question. This is avoidance in a way. We see Frank Wheeler avoid things by talking all around it. Here, the avoidance is with a simple question. I don't have to spell it out for you again. I've lost control. I've lost pride. I used to be a proud woman. Note when she mentions this is when Carver decides to give us, through the first person narration, details of her. She's attractive, 30, just past 30, tall, long black hair, green eyes, the only green-eyed woman I'd ever known. Sometimes these characters speak with cliches and get away with it because it is through the first person. In the old days, I used to say things about her green eyes. She'd tell me it was because then she knew she was meant for something special. Again, reaching back to the old days, the past, the dream. Hell, you could even, the green eyes, you could say, are the green light for Gatsby. Didn't I know it? I feel so awful for one thing to another. I can hear the telephone ringing downstairs in the office. It's been ringing on and off all day. Maybe more than any other story, except for the bath, which sort of hinges on it. The telephone as that objective correlative of fear and desperation and panic that the outside world is waiting for them, plays a role in this story quite a bit. Even when I was dozing, I could hear it. I'd open my eyes, look at the ceiling, listen to it ring, and wonder what was happening to us. So even in his sleep, he has these worries from the world. Now, no, this is a story about a relationship, an emotional relationship that's been severed, and it's irreparable. And at the same time, that doesn't mean other things go away. Real outside world. So there's, again, it's that ringing. And then eventually it manifests in the form of customers who are knocking at the door, trying to see, like, is this place open? So it's not just the phone, but it starts off as the phone is the ring. And again, it's a lot like that horse's bell in the Frost poem, Stopping by Woods. Maybe he looks, so he opens his eyes, looks at the ceiling. Maybe he should look at the floor. Nice contrast of the high and low. He debases himself here, grounds himself. My heart's broken. It's turned to a piece of stone. She really speaks like a country western song sometimes. That's as bad as anything. I'm no good anymore. Holly, I go. And then we get this fairly simple structure where we go from the here and now to the past, and it lets us allow us to contrast even more. The reality versus the dream. And things were good. They'd first moved down, taken over as managers. We thought we were out of the woods, free rent, free utilities, plus $300 a month. You couldn't beat it with a stick. That is an expression that I wish people would bring back. Again, it's Carver having his characters speak like real people. Again, one of my thrills in discovering Carver when I was in an undergraduate, and I was surrounded by people who felt like they had to throw as English majors and then on into graduate school, people who felt like they had to impress me with language. I was so happy to find this sort of soulmate in Carver, who was able to communicate so effectively the struggles of the human heart while relying on language that I grew up around as someone who didn't grow up around the language of even say Frank Wheeler or someone who wrote his beautiful sentences as Fitzgerald, and don't even get me started on theorists. But nevertheless, we see things are going good. Holly took care of the books. She's good with figures. He does the handiwork around the grounds, mowed the grass, cut the weeds. This also sets up this sort of natural contrast later on when we see how bad the pool looks, how rough the grass looks. That shows, it's a connection to their state too. It shows that things have fallen apart for them. So it's a very, very simple image to use, but it works well. Holly took care of the books. Everything was fine for the first year. I was holding down another job nights. We were getting ahead. We had plans. Then one morning, I don't know, I just laid some bathroom tile in one of the units when this little Mexican maid comes in to clean. It was Holly had hired her. Very subtle form of passive-aggressive blaming of his wife, like subconsciously. He's like, well, she's the one who hired her. I can't really say I noticed her before. We spoke, we saw each other, she called me, I remember miss her. Anyway, one thing and another. Note the expression, one thing led to another, is truncated here by Carver. In the sense that even it's minimalized. So that morning I started paying attention. One morning he's working on the plumbing, and it's sort of a crude or rudimentary metaphor there, but nonetheless he's working on the plumbing. She comes in and they get down in the bed and do it. Note this too, and I think this is very important. We've seen a lot of stories that deal with adultery this semester, and that's not to say there's not a lot of great stories to be written about the troubles, other troubles that come up. But nonetheless, I think it's a good comparison point. It's nice to be able to compare these things. Look at the difference between Frank Wheeler's justification or explanation in his head, at least, and then maybe to April too, when he admits to it, about his affair that he has with Maureen Grube, versus this narrator's explanation. With Frank Wheeler, we get pages and pages of why he did it, why he needed to do it, why he felt better, why he felt bad, this and this. Here, Carver doesn't give us anything close to that. He gives us the exact opposite. Then one morning, I don't know. Basically saying, I don't have a reason. I don't have an explanation. It wasn't when things were bad. Maybe there's a thought that things weren't going to last and the good, but he doesn't give us an easy explanation. And once again, this is where I think Carver gets into our bones a little bit. Whereas, with Frank Wheeler, even though that book sort of reeled us in as being culpable with the sort of the tertiary characters as well, still we could feel some amount of distance between Frank's decision to commit adultery and ourselves, because we could say, well, that's the way he looked at it. Here, by not giving us an explanation, and I don't think it's cheating, him doing this, he's allowing our own reasons to possibly sip in. And when we allow our own reasons, like what might even, like we're sort of putting ourselves in those similar situations. And even bigger than that, the idea that there might not be an excuse, there may not be a thing to put your finger on that led to this disaster, is frightening as shit. That may be the sort of existential dread at the heart of this second collection of Carver, is that there is something out there waiting, lurking, even when things are going good, and we're not going to know it at the time, and we may not even realize we're doing it. Now, there's that to be said. You can also say, oh, it's just a bad decision. I won't make a bad decision. Nevertheless, I think it gets into our bones a little bit. So I think that would be a good comparison point. His rationalization or lack of explanation for why he did it. There's one of Carver's favorite writers and inspirations was Anton Chekhov, and he's probably arguably the greatest short story writer of all time, Chekhov. If you haven't read him, you should. But his most famous story is called Lady with a Little Dog, or Lady with a Pet Dog, depending upon the translation. And it too is about an adulterous relationship, a relationship born out of adultery. And I think it's interesting to compare that story and that character's justifications with this one as well. So something to think about down the road. Nevertheless, we get back to the now. Holly, you're still a proud woman. You're still number one. Shakes her head. Anytime you say number one, you're still number one in an argument like this, it's probably a bad idea, unconsciously sort of doing it, because it means there's a number two. There shouldn't be a number two. You shouldn't say you're number one. Something's died in me, she goes. Again, we get the melodramatic language here. You've killed something, just like you'd taken an axe to it. Everything is in dirt now. She finishes her drink, begins to cry. I go to hug her, but it's no good. So what does he do? Instead of hugging her, when he can't hug her, he fixes more drinks. And we see that that sinisterness of alcohol rear its head then. So looks out the window. When he looks out the window, once again, we get that symbol of real world pressure, that objective correlative there in the form of these two cars without estate plates. And the people are talking to each other like, what's going on with this motel? Is it not open? And the phone starts to ring. It's just pressure, pressure, pressure. Even a while ago when you were doing it, you were thinking of her, Holly goes. Dwayne's, this is hurtful. She takes a drink, I give her Holly. It's true. Don't argue with me. You know how many times in this story it's characters, and especially him, just repeating her name? That is another example of a Carver character being unable to articulate his faults, his failings, his thoughts, and just relying on a repetition of that name. I'm glad my wife's not in here for this lecture, because she'd be like looking at me going, that's exactly what you do when we get in a fight. You just repeat my fucking name instead of getting to the real issues. Like, why are you chewing so loudly? All right, let me take a break here, and I'll do the second half.